Welcome back to the very independent producer conference. This time we're talking about how we take information and process it to bring new media to the audience. So how do we find a story? How do we find an interesting personality? How do we gather that information? The next guest is Pete Quinones of the Pete Quinones Show. He's an epic interviewer, and one of the skills that he's learned over the years is the value of listening, because the interview skill has a lot to do with making contact, asking some insightful questions, open-ended questions, and then sitting back and listening. And when you can do that, you become an excellent conversationalist in the minds of the people that you're talking to. And it's a little known secret that we can all have access to. So, Pete, welcome to today's independent gathering of sharing our knowledge and useful skills with each other. And when did you come across the skill that you have honed over the past couple of years of learning how to do interviews and purveying useful knowledge nuggets to your audience?
This is going to sound so corny,
Good.
but when I was like 20, 21 years old, my dad said, "There's a book I want you to read because I think you're terrible at talking to people." And it was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And basically, what he talked about in there was most people want to talk about themselves. So ask them a question and let them roll.
Now, this seems like a useful skill to open up the doors and avenues to success in life. And right before everyone gets to this topic, it might occur to them that this is a really useful skeleton key to success, to be able to ask questions, to move the ball forward, to gather useful knowledge for your projects and obstacles in front of you to remove them. But we're not given access to any type of these skills from schooling or even some of the higher levels of university. Do you think that's ironic, on purpose? What's your perspective?
Well, I think from what you've been teaching people for years now, uh, people that are seen as from elite families or can have elite futures, they get these kind of skills. But the average person who they don't want to, um, you know, maybe we don't want this person coming up and making noise, or we just don't want them around. We don't want them as a part of our group. They don't tell them about these things. So you go into life thinking that everybody you everybody you meet wants to you have to impress them by telling them who you are, what you know, all these things. And we still fall into it all the time. I do it in conversations with my wife where we'll be talking about a very small subject, and then I'll find something in my brain from 120 years ago and be like, okay, and here's the historical precedent for it. She's like, I'm good. I'm good. You can stop anytime now. I get it. Yeah, I think it really just goes to show that something that I've really taken to talking about for a couple of years and was literally constructing a tweet around when before we started going was elites, and how to be how elites always run things, and how to be how to act like an elite, or to at least take advantage of elite theory.
Well, I mean, it also occurs to me now that you're kind of unfolding it, that these are expressions of active literacies, right? Publishing, interviewing, all these sort of things. It's like the output of learning. And what they do is they set everyone up with, you need to be literate. But literacy is a form of slavery until a method of critical thinking is consistently practiced by the reader. In other words, they teach people how to input, but they don't teach people to figure out if that input they're giving themselves is factual, actual, or fiction. And your life oftentimes depends on these types of modalities of research. So they set up the bottom level of people. You can internalize, but you can't retort. And in order to retort, you would need some thinking and some methods brought to the situation in order to have something retorting about that's of substance and merit. And I think it's really the critical thinking step and then the active literacy step is what liberates us, because everyone already has the literacy step, and that's not helping people because they don't know how to figure out if what they're reading is fact or fiction.
Yep. In 1947, Edward Bernays, even more important, I think, than his book Propaganda, which I think was written in 1921, 22. His essay, The Engineering of Consent, is probably the most important thing I've ever read on propaganda, because he talks about that. He talks about, he doesn't say it specifically, but he certainly implies that most people are only educated enough to be propagandized, that they can be properly propagandized. And that's once you realize that the first paragraph of that essay, I copy and paste every once in a while, just throw it up on social media, because he talks about how even the whole concept of free speech allows the social engineer to come in and control people's minds. So it's something that we have to learn. And I think if you're somebody like myself who has a podcast, talks to people, also does interviews on his own, I'm trying to propagandize people. But what I'm hoping to propagandize people into believing is something that is going to help them and pull them out of this matrix that has been created, and not, not further entrench them into it.
All right. So at this point, I say we have to define our terms because I'm a little confused. So propaganda, I would define as the use of words to make people believe something that's not true. Because the opposite of that, if it was true, it's education. So are you propagandizing your audience, or are you trying to help them educate themselves?
See, when I hear propaganda, I think of advertising, because it's the same thing, and it's basically the way Bernays laid out his argument in the book Propaganda. I think propaganda has just basically taken on this term that's very negative. So,
Cool. So we'll use a neutral definition
yeah.
in our dealings because I understand that too. It was originally the Vatican's way of educating people about their offering back in, hundreds of years ago.
So once you learn the art of persuasion, let's call it persuasion, because persuasion doesn't can have a negative connotation, but it certainly has a positive connotation as well. Once you understand that that's what people who want to control you are doing, if you can at least be decent at the art of persuasion in communicating a message that helps people to unravel themselves from this web of lies that they've been trapped in, then I think that's when you can start moving forward. And I think that's when you actually start becoming a good communicator. And I think that's when people start to, there are a lot of podcasts. I mean, I think right now there are like 5 million, 6 million podcasts, probably more than that. My podcast is in the top 0.05% of podcasts in the world, according to a website called Listen Notes. I don't think that if I was just rambling and just incoherently talking about, oh, why did World War II happen, and what was the general outcome of World War II, and I was just repeating what other people said, and I wasn't saying it in a persuasive way, that people wouldn't be tuning in, and I wouldn't be able to make my living doing what I do.
Well, that's a good point. So persuade also can have a neutral area. It's not necessarily to take away somebody's free will. Sometimes it's to give their free will back in that situation. So that makes sense. And how do you source the people that you want to talk to? Is it about like what the end result's going to be for your audience? Like, I want my audience to understand this nuance of this subject. I'm going to go get this expert who's going to come help me marshal that evidence to communicate to my audience. Or how do you do it? Like, what's your method?
I'm my audience. So when a subject comes up that I'm interested in, I will read a little bit about it. I will research it, but then I'll be like, hey, in many cases, I'll reach out to people I know, to my network of friends, and I'll be like, who's good on this subject? And they'll be like, oh, okay, this person's good on this subject. Let me introduce you to them. It's very rare that you find somebody who won't talk to you. Most people want to tell you what they, it goes back to when friends influence people. You ask them questions, they want to tell you what they know, and we just jump off from there. 23 episodes on World War II. I have 23 episodes on World War II from the German perspective, starting at the Treaty of Versailles, going all the way through the Nuremberg trial. I mean, I wanted to know how all of that happened, and all of that from the viewpoint of, the suppressed viewpoint, the viewpoint that the people in charge don't want us to know, from the Prussian standpoint. So I sourced somebody who had all of that information, and we did what's 24 hours, and now is actually being turned into a book.
Oh, that's fantastic. So now if I'm getting your situation correctly, you're educating yourself. You're using the interview skills to go access information you want to know about. And at the same time, you're smart enough to package it up so it's not just throwaway. You're sharing it, and that becomes your product out to the audience, which is useful because it shows them how they could do likewise on any other given topic. And it edifies and educates them as they listen to like 100 hours on World War II.
Mhm.
And you're not supposed to talk about communism.
Yeah, well, you're not supposed to talk about the fact that the United States and the USSR were fought side by side. Uh, yeah, well, another thing is that and I guess a gift that I have, which I mean, I don't even, it's very natural with me. After I do those interviews, I can go on other people's shows a week later, and now I can give that information out. So where, whoever came on my show might not be willing to do somebody else's show because that, you know, well, we like Pete. Pete's been on the show before. Can you come on and talk about, the Russian Revolution in 1905? And I'm like, okay, sure, yeah. I just did 2 episodes with somebody on it. Sure, I have all the information here, and I have all the notes. So I'm able to. It's basically, and then I've done that with other people where other people have become very well versed at what I'm talking about, and it's almost like this pyramid effect where now now because of what I did, I did an episode on what books did the Nazis burn, and that that's probably one of my most popular episodes ever. I did it on somebody else's show. I put it on my channel, and then now I see people like all over the place doing episodes on what books the Nazis burned, and basically they're using my notes and my outline that I used in that episode to do it.
And that's a contribution that keeps paying for like you do it once and it's one to many. It's just out there doing its work and you're on to a different project, a different interview, a different subject. But that's also the brilliance of publishing to the web.
Mhm. Yeah. So the whole thing about the one thing I learned from starting a podcast was if you have an interest in a subject and you track down someone who's an expert at the subject, 98% of the time they'll be like, yeah, I'm available to come on and talk about it. And from that, the relationships you build with that just spiral out. If I talk to one person and I know that they know this person, but I don't know that person, give me an introduction. I mean, that happens. I can look at my emails right now just from the past week, and there are 3 emails titled introduction, which is somebody else saying, hey, Pete wants to talk about this on his show. Pete's got a good podcast. Why don't you go on a show and talk about it? I just recorded an episode on the Pacific theater of World War II yesterday, starting from the late 1800s and going forward as to why the war happened.
Yeah, it starts with the Spanish American War
Yeah.
and Kipling's cartoon, The White Man's Burden, along with the poem, of course. But that
But
was
no one
very
talks about that. Oh,
illustrative.
yeah, the Japanese woke up one day and they woke up and chose violence and they just flew some planes in. It's like, no, let's go back 50 years. Let's go back for 60 years and see what was happening.
Yeah, are you going to cover like Ishii in Unit 731? Because there's a lot of racism and eugenics that was adopted over there too.
Yeah, well, we might do that another episode. My guest is doing his thesis at Hillsdale College right now on the Japanese theater of World War II and everything around it. So
It's
we
one of
just
my
hit the
favorite
highlight. We hit the
colleges.
highlights. What?
I like Hillsdale. They're one of my favorite colleges. They got a lot of good professors. 100%. All right. So, in the broader spectrum, as you unfold this education for yourself, is there an overall theme that you're like, I'm trying to answer all the questions about freedom or what, how do you see your journey of education? Because it's something that goes on and there's not necessarily an end to. So, how do you manage that meandering of educating oneself along the way? Is there a point or is it just all over the place and you're getting scattered pieces of information, or are you getting a coherent understanding on something that you're seeking to understand?
I have this. I look at the narrative of post New Deal America and especially post World War II America. And what I'm trying to do in my study of the history of it is deconstruct it and try to explain to people how it happened, why it happened, who did it, who's responsible for it. And also something that I've really taken to in the last year is something that that I've learned from you is how even in a world as such where we look and we see a lot of the government can reach out and can touch people, can really destroy people's lives. but it doesn't worrying about that. There's no reason to worry about that. If you're worrying about that, you're worrying about something that is most likely not going to happen. So, how do we move forward? I tend to believe that this regime is falling apart. I see it breaking apart. I see it becoming weak. I see them throwing their own people under the bus now. That is a great, I mean, just last night, the Fannie Willis DA in Fulton County, she's officially thrown under the bus. Were you gonna say something?
No, there's a lot of that going on. The other side kind of eating themselves and attacking amongst each other as we just kind of stand back and say how ludicrous it all is.
Yeah, and I see the regime as like everybody up there except like Thomas Massey and JD Vance and a couple other people, you know. So it's like I lump everyone in together. But I see them falling apart, and I'm like, okay, we need to start building what comes next. We have really smart people. I've been looking a lot lately at the tech sector, a lot of what they call the PayPal mafia, the guys out in San Francisco, and a lot of what they've been doing and a lot of what they've been signaling seems like they're trying to set it up to build what comes next. I don't even know if they're on my side. I think I probably some of my values line up with their values, but what I'm looking at is I'm looking at what they're doing, and it seems to me that they're anticipating that this is falling apart, so they want to build what comes next. At the local level, I think that people can do that. Even at the state level, I think that people can do that. They just have to be willing to do it. They have to break out of this malaise, this what's called black pilled, where it's just going to get worse. We're going to have you know, if Biden wins in 2024, our country's going to become completely Jacobin. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, I don't. The Jacobins were pretty well organized. I don't really see that happen. These people don't see they're a bunch, it's a gerontocracy. I mean, these they don't even have a military that can they have less than 30,000 fighting men in the military. What everything's falling apart. We need to start building what's next. So I've been talking about that a lot lately, and you know, making connections with people in my area, people who are been here for hundreds of years, very significant people, people of means, and just trying to put together like networks that we can start building upon, so that whatever it is that comes next is actually in place when this stuff when none of this can be relied upon anymore. And I'm talking about even if it gets to the cases of like food supplies, we need to be ready.
I think it was MIT. It just did a study. It said society is going to collapse, civilization is going to collapse by 2040. So like 15 years. And if they keep the current heading of like saying you can't have cows and we're not going to have farms and we got to, Mother Earth and CO2 and all this other stuff and carbon credits, just pay money to the priests and they'll make all the stuff go away, you will crash civilization. But I think people are starting to realize like the driver of the bus should not be at the helm right now. We got to remove that driver and put ourselves back in that position. What growth has gone on in people's lives since COVID? Most people just turtled up and they're waiting for things to get better. And I knew when they did that, it's like if we don't double down and really go for it, there's not going to be a free market to return to. We're
Mm,
going to be like Palestinians trying to find our homes 3 generations later. Like, where'd they go? Because while it is a problem, if you speak truth to power and you feel you're in danger and you feel like something's going to happen to you, that's a problem. Now, let me ask you, is it going to get better from not doing anything about it? Because if you start to do something about it, maybe you find out it's not as bad as you thought. Still need to do something about it. But if you just keep waiting for society to not have truth in journalism because everyone's afraid of getting whacked, I mean, these are real things that go on out there. Netflix is coming out on the octopus conspiracy with Danny Casolaro, who was definitely murdered. And I don't think we should consider it so far out that people in political power kill other people to preserve their political power. What do you think war is about?
right.
What do you think? Like, so people here are so naive that they'll just believe the propaganda. And because it's so much easier, because they don't have, like, no one's been given, here's your critical thinking, here's your creative problem solving, figure your way out of this. It's like you're literate, you're doomed to intake whatever poison they give you every day. You can't make heads or tails of it. You can't effectively plan your future, your family's future, any of this other stuff. And you got people ruling us, our non-elected rulers, that aren't qualified. Like if they were good at it and they could stay like off the radar, have at it. But you guys are really awful at it. especially like the Fannie Willis, like that whole thing should never have taken 3 years to be figured out.
Well,
So, what encouraging things do you have for, let's white pill the audience? It's not a great situation we've inherited. It only gets worse if we do nothing. The only way it gets better is through improving ourselves and banding together in creative ways of communication to solve the problem.
well, one thing I do a live stream every Sunday at 4 o'clock, and one thing I've taken to doing is to start it off with letters that I've received, and once people start sending in letters talking about the great things that's happening with them, other people start sending in letters, and it just multiplies. I have one right here that I'm waiting. That's for this Sunday's live stream, and what I found out by doing this is not only do I make connections for my podcast, that I can get people to come on, but because I'm making connections in my real life. I have people who contact me and it's like, "Hey, I heard you just moved to, where I live in Alabama. I'm a half hour away. Let's get together." And I get together with them and they're like, "Well, I have access to raw milk. I have access to meat, to beef right off the farm. I have access to all of this. So, let's, let's set this up. Let's figure out what we can do here. Let's figure out how we can store all this stuff, for a rainy day." Then I have people around me who've been here for 200 years who, own thousands of heads of cattle here. I mean, they're not going to, if they say, "Oh, we're outlawing cattle," I mean, they're gonna go to war. I mean, they'll literally go to war. This is what their family's been doing for over 200 years in, eh, you know, a thousand feet from my backyard. And being able to make these kind of connections with like-minded people, and then you don't have to agree. And here's the biggest problem that I see. I have to agree 100% with somebody ideologically in order to be able to get together with them and to do planning and to no, that's just that's you're not a real libertarian stuff. You're not a real libertarian because you don't believe, because your opinion on borders. You don't let that it's the important stuff. It's the stuff that is civilizational, that keeps civilizations going. If you agree on that kind of stuff, if you agree, I get people who write me letters say, "Because of your show, I stopped, I got involved in local politics. I started my own business, and I'm basically my income is recession free. I got married and I'm having kids. I went back to church, and I mean, these are the things that make culture. Culture is so important. If you have people living around each other who share a culture, you don't have to write laws. They're written on each other, on your hearts. And that's something that you're not going to see from the government. The government has to constantly put out laws and write laws and pile laws upon laws upon laws upon laws because they don't have a culture. All they have is a want of control. And that's the way they control you. But even once you get to the point where all those laws are written up, then nobody even remembers what the laws are, so nobody's enforcing them anyway. I mean, we're literally living in what Sam Francis called the narco tyranny. Basically, there's anarchy for some and tyranny for others. And if you agree with the regime in charge, you basically freely get to live in anarchy and do as you wish and operate. You can even burn down cities if you want to. But if you don't agree with the regime in charge, you can't even pick up a rifle and protect your home from people burning it down. So culture means everything. And I think that I'm not saying do what the Branch Davidians did and you all move into the same building and everything, but living at least generally in the same area, it's such a great support system. And having a support system at times now, and not only having a support system, but building up that support system to have leadership qualities and to be like, because if everything is falling apart, it's going to leave a vacuum. And that vacuum will be filled by somebody. And it's better that you fill that vacuum with people sharing your values than the people who caused all of this to fall, be able to retake that, be able to go right back into go back right back into their positions of power, at least you can hold them. At least you can hold them off. At least you can be like, no, we're in charge here now. I mean, it's as far as a national government goes, who knows how that could even, what that would even look like. But as far as your local and your state government, if your state's small enough, you could do it. You just have to share culture.
Well, I think it's so, I mean, you're talking about it's so meta because you're talking about the essence of the human experience that we all share. And I think that unless people go to that higher altitude and take a look at these dynamics, like the nation state is the function of, individuals with their belief systems and their morals and ethics, and then families and communities and states, and then it percolates up. But it really, if you look at it, it doesn't go from the ground up like it's supposed to. It goes from the outside of this country top down and then enforces and precipitates a whole bunch of things that are unfreedom, un-American. And it's been going on since, it's been going on over 100 years. The Reese Committee was 50 or 60 years ago, and they identified it. It's just that nothing was done because by then people were already taught to read, but not to critically think, not to communicate, not to be able to take effective action. And that was kind of the death knell to freedom, which I believe can be revived. You can't really kill off a thing you don't understand, but
Well,
without maintenance, it
power is
does.
important. FDR, one thing FDR did that I want, if I'm going to have leadership, I want it to be one person so that we know whose heads to cut off if things get bad. But but FDR basically became the most powerful man on the planet in his presidency. More executive orders by, I think, by 4 times than any other president, and he basically centralized all power to himself. Well, like what's happened many times before, when he died, there wasn't somebody to pass that power off to. So it trickled down into all of the departments that he had created. And now you have this octopus, these tentacles, this Leviathan now that has all the power of a sovereign. And that's what we've been trying to solve ever since. We've been
All the
trying
power
to,
with none of the accountability, though.
right, right. Well, I mean, because most of those people aren't even elected.
Mhm.
They're employees for life. So what we've been trying to solve ever since is how to give that power back to, I mean, the masses can't organize. So when you say power to the people, the masses, that's why 2,000 people can always dictate what to 350 million people, because the mass can't organize. But at least you want people of the kind of metal, the kind of more morality that the founders had, that that Americans had in the 1800s, that Americans had before we decided to become the world empire. That you can have some of those people in charge, and I think things would be a lot better. But you have to cut all of that fat. It's like it's like pork belly. It's like a lot of fat on pork belly is great, but sometimes you got to trim a lot of it away. All of this fat needs to be trimmed away and made into a government that just basically goes back to doing what it was designed to do. Uh, You're muted.
To protect our rights, that's the only legitimate
Yeah,
aspect of government could have.
sure. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I would settle for a government that ignores me. I mean, it's like I would love a government of that my friends were in charge of, the people who shared my values were in charge of. But at this point, you just want one that would ignore you, one that would at least be neutral to you. The government in charge right now is, and I mean, they hate me because I reject everything that they promote.
Well, I mean, it makes sense though, because they are the party of slavery and we are abolitionists. So they're not supposed to like us. They support the wrong thing. They
Right.
always have. That's the whole Democratic Party. I mean, I'm not a Republican either, but if I was in a political party, I would join the abolitionist party, uh, you know, and probably go at it from that route.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the Republican Party now is just, it's like Tom Woods says. He goes, you have the stupid party, you have the stupid party, you have the evil party, and every once in a while they get together and they agree on something that's stupid and evil. And
Yeah.
when you look at them, when you look and you see what they come together and agree on, um, aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, um, Obamacare, all these things. When you see them come together and they agree on it, you know that it's just one party that agrees on the most. It's what manufacturing consent. Noam Chomsky said you get a box, you give people a box that they can argue in, and they can't argue about anything outside of that box, but you encourage vigorous arguing inside that box so that they feel like they have a, it's like I see people now who are like, well, if we can just vote for Trump, it's like, okay, you get Trump elected, it doesn't matter that Trump gets elected. Who is he surrounding himself with? Who is he putting in the office, basically the HR department? What is that? The OMB, the HR department, to who those 5,000 people that he can fire on day one. Who is he is he firing them? Is he replacing them? And if he is replacing some of them, is he replacing them with people that are on our side? Because if it's not, if it's just Trump, hiring John Bolton again,
Yeah.
well, then where are we going? Then it's just a pressure release valve on the right.
Rex Tillerson in charge of energy, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
You
All
bring
right.
in
So,
Douglas McGregor after you've lost the election in 2020. It's like Douglas McGregor should have been there the whole time.
so people have to raise their intellectual capacity to participate in these situations. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to balance it out.
Yeah, it's people have been indoctrinated into a civic religion, and they think that indoctrination they gave is true. If they just follow these steps, Schoolhouse Rock, how does a bill become a bill? It's not like that.
Case
You
true.
you have to be able to you have to be able to educate yourself on how this all works. And you have to be willing to say, I'm not I'm going to drop out and I'm going to concentrate on just strengthening myself and strengthening my community, or we have to come up with a plan. Either way, you're going to have a plan. And that's the biggest problem most people have. I do a lot of complaining. Okay. I complain about a lot of things, but the things I complain about, I don't see a plan to defeat. Okay. The things that I talk about that I'm not complaining about, I'm saying, this what I have a plan. Here's a plan. This is the way we can do it. So, I mean, I'm not exempt from complaining, but I will tell you honestly that I'm complaining. It's like I don't know that but I'm not one of these people who's complaining because I'm just complaining to complain. I'm in my complaints, I'm trying to educate as well and say, here's why I'm complaining. Here's why I don't see a way out of this. And then hopefully maybe somebody else comes up with a really good idea. I mean, people contact me all the time who give me really good ideas, and I'm like, I'm running with that. Oh,
Well, I think that's it brings it full circle because we started out with interviewing skills, and basically the deliverable of that is you're raising the aptitude and increasing the invigorating the attitude of the audience. We're getting together better plans. We're meeting new people who we're going to need to do these things, who, if we knew them already, these things would be done. So there has to be a process that we initiate, that we go out and start taking action, and not just complaining that there's no solution here, but working in the areas where we do see there are things that can be done that would make the situation better. So it's part doing it for ourselves and then part bringing it to other people so that they can do likewise.
if I can just give any piece of advice, is not to be scared to ask people for help, not to be scared to ask people for an interview, not to be scared to ask people for advice. As soon as we're done here, in 25 minutes, somebody contacted me, said, I'm a supporter of the show. I want to start a Substack. Can I ask you some questions? And I said, sure. So I'm going to hop on Zoom with them and I'm going to try and help, because it's just another person out there who's working to gather together this elite core of people that we need to actually, you need even on the local level to have change and be able to insulate yourself from anything. If you live in a great area like I do, to insulate yourself from anybody trying to invade from the outside.
Absolutely. All right. Where can people find your work, Pete? I want them to dig into your podcast and make those numbers grow.
Yeah, you can go to the podcast is at peteq.org. The Substack is at petesubstack.com. And That's it. If you go to peteq.org, it takes you to my podcast page. If you go to petesubstack.com, it takes you right to my Substack.
All
So,
right. The Pete
yep.
Quinones Show,
Yeah.
peteq.org. That's a good short URL, dude. That was easy for me to do.
Yeah. I was happy that that was available.
Thank you so much for investing some time for the benefit of today's audience. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Everyone else, we'll be right back with another very independent producer. And we'll just have a few short messages in between.
Thank you, Richard.